Hello, this is Ralph K. Ginorio. Welcome to the 22nd installment of my video adaptation of my my classroom lessons on the historical background to the 9/11 terror atrocities. We have gone through the Wannsee Conference, which planned the final solution to the Jewish problem. We have talked about the concentration camps and the massive ghettos that were established at Warsaw and Theresienstadt. But the concentration camps were only the first and most basic type of camp that were established by Hitler's instrumentality of genocide. The second type of camp was far more productive and useful to the war effort, and this was the labor camp. Now, the most famous labor camps in the Nazi Empire, first of all, at Auschwitz. Now, Auschwitz was all three types of camps. Auschwitz was like the New York City of death. It was the center, the major black hole at the center of the great swirling spiral galaxy of Nazi evil. Auschwitz was a massive city-sized complex that had a concentration camp section, medical experimentation areas, ultimately it had a death camp, and it had a labor camp. The IG Farben chemical concern worked hand in glove with the SS as they built a state-of-the-art slave labor facility to produce chemicals for the German war effort. IG Farben executives and the camp commander, whose name I am forgetting at this point, had many conferences, as did their peeps, to plan out exactly what would be the most efficient type of operation. And one of the things that they loved, or that they calculated into this, was the IG Farben facility would be much more efficient than any other facility in the world because you don't have to waste time on safety gear for your people. For the laborers, there was an expected limited lifespan, and you would use those laborers as much as you could until they died, because as Mao Zedong once said of Chinese people, there's more where that came from. We always have more people. Well, the idea was that as you build and produce chemicals at the IG Farben plant in Auschwitz, that one of your consumable materials that you just got to replace, on top of fresh water coming in and polluted water coming out, fresh raw materials coming in and processed chemicals coming out, living Jewish labor and other labor going in, and dead Jewish labor going out once they've been through their useful time. The other great labor camp, well, there were more, but the other really famous one is the Great Mittelbau-Dora facility that produced V-2 rockets at the end of the war. Picture a great underground tunnel chamber turned into an assembly line to produce rockets, and there are many components of rockets that are incredibly dangerous. The materials, for example, that comprise rocket fuel, incredibly dangerous. So they staffed the Mittelbau with slave labor, particularly Jews, and some of these Jews had technical backgrounds that helped them be more efficient slaves. But they intentionally gave them a caloric intake significantly below what was needed for survival. Certainly for somebody who was living the active lifestyle of a slave, working 14 to 16-hour days with a few hours off to sleep, and actually up to sometimes 18 to 20-hour days. So basically, people who were being worked to death in rags that were disintegrating until they were working naked, if they possibly could, were being intentionally fed substandard caloric intake so that they would systematically starve, and the Germans tweaked this so that the shelf life of their average laborer was going to make this an efficient operation. Your slaves come in completely unskilled, you want to get them up to speed so that they're efficient little working machines, and then when they wear out, you just replace them with more. So the labor camp system is one of those things that implicates people far beyond the Nazi Party, far beyond, anyway, the instrumentality of the SS and the Death's Head commandos and all of Hitler's black-shirted doers of evil, because it involved all sorts of talented people from the world of science and business. Wernher von Braun and the other great rocket geniuses who, after World War II, were snatched up in Operation Paperclip by the American military so that we would have a first-class rocket plan. A man and a bunch of men instrumental in getting the United States to the moon and back from 1969 to 1972, they were involved in this. They weren't there every day at the Mittelbau watching Jews die. They didn't calculate the caloric intake, but they were part of a process that utilized slave labor. Slave labor went on in their eyesight from time to time. They knew about it. Now again, you can ask yourself, if I were back then, if I were in a totalitarian police state, would I have the guts, the character, or the suicidal nature to stand up futilely and say, no, not me, and invite reprisal against myself and everyone I love in order to avoid getting my hands dirty and doing evil? Or would I screw up my conscience, fold it up real good and hide it away somewhere and say I was just following orders, I have to do what I have to do, nobody has a choice in these matters? It is easy for modern people to stamp and proudly say, I'd never do that, when nothing like that has ever happened to them. Unless you have put your life on the line, your fortune on the line, your sacred honor on the line for a principle, and paid a price for it, you have no idea what that's like. Doing something like that is like childbirth or combat. It is something that you can't experience secondhand. You can hear about it, but you will always have a limited understanding until or unless you actually do it. To my credit, there have been times in my life where I have paid the price of my principles, and there are times when I'm ashamed of when I haven't. I imagine that's true for most of us. But there is a taint on anyone involved in these processes. And the same is true for the IG Farben executives and the other executives in the German military-industrial complex during World War II who intentionally and knowingly utilized slave labor in order to make a more efficient assembly line. Just as I argue that there is a moral responsibility that somebody who scheduled the trains like Secretary General Kurt Waldheim did for scheduling trains that moved product to processing when product are human beings and processing is mass murder. But again, easy to say decades later on another continent when it hasn't happened to me. That hasn't, thank God, happened to me or to anyone hopefully here yet. And if we do our civic duty, hopefully it never will. Next time, the third type of camp. We've had concentration camps, we've had labor camps, the death camps. Next time.